It reminds me of the community flywheel concept, as opposed to sort of like growth through advertising, where you get somebody who's in your community, get them more engaged, and then turn them into an ambassador, where they're then the ones who are bringing in new members who are starting at the beginning of that flywheel, kind of finding out about the community, getting more drawn in, getting more engaged, and then they become an ambassador. And so sort of this free marketing, very trust-based, very authentic, like all the things that we talk about in nonprofit, wanting more of, that community flywheel approach really delivers on a lot of that. All right, welcome everybody. This is Greg Harrell Edge here for this week's Proimpact Pod. How should modern executive directors think about blank? And today we're doing community building. So in the nonprofit sector, for way too long, we used the word community to frankly mean things that it's not. That if you make an online donation to us, you've joined our community. And I heard somebody say, ultimately, as a starting point, the litmus test for community needs to be, can members interact with each other? And if they can't, then it's simply not a community, which is something that our guest today has been redefining and solving for the nonprofit sector. Our guest is Tasha Van Vlack, founder of the Nonprofit Hive, which has been taking over the nonprofit sector. She is on a mission to change what community means, one real conversation at a time. And the beauty of the Nonprofit Hive really is the real one-on-one conversations. If you're not a member of it, you should absolutely join it. And she has recently launched a tech platform called Community Hives, which is gives the ability to white label the same great concept of the Nonprofit Hive for any group. And so the Proimpact Project is doing that. Ours is about to launch, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But we're going to be talking about how to build community overall, and specifically ways that you might be able to use community hives to do that. So excited to welcome Tasha to the show.
Hello, Greg. This is so exciting. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for doing it. And so I'm excited to talk about community hives. So many people have learned about and know about the Nonprofit Hive over the last few months. But let's start there because it is so well known and popular. What is one of your favorite moments that has happened on the Nonprofit Hive or via the Nonprofit Hive?
There is so many that it's almost hard to choose which ones I would want to say first. But in the last year, one of the coolest things that came out of the Nonprofit Hive has been a funder from the US, founder from Canada, and a project that then happened in Nigeria with an accelerator. And it all kind of came together because two people met in conversation. I kind of saw some threads that I looked at and was like, oh, Danica, and here's Eric, and these two humans should know each other because they're both so incredible and doing amazing work across Africa. And I actually didn't know they were going to be doing a project together until they started to tag me in all these amazing posts talking about what they were doing together with this accelerator. And that's just one of many stories from doing this curated matchmaking across the nonprofit world.
And so one of the things that I've got a bunch of questions about and want to figure out what it could look like for lots of EDs to create their own communities is something I've seen you say a bunch of times, which is the idea that it's not just the technology, that it's really the little details where you're designing for belonging, a phrase that you used. And so you mentioned it right there where you sort of saw the kernels of it in one person and the other person. And I know that you've done a lot of sort of manual matchmaking through the Nonprofit Hive. Broadly, what are some of or specifically, what are some of the ways that you think about designing for belonging beyond just, the technology that makes a community possible, but those little details?
I had a really great conversation earlier today with one of my OG community members from the Nonprofit Hive. There's a group that obviously I'm still very close and in touch with because they helped us launch right at the beginning. And this individual, Chris Wong, we were talking about what does it take to kind of build community and leadership and that interesting intersection. And I think there's a consistency and care that we don't always talk about, in the nonprofit world as a leader, as the person building community in small shops. That's often the executive director that's building out this community. And really, it's relationships, right? That is that fundamental spot. And relationships, really great ones, they require consistency and care. And that doesn't have to actually be as enormous as we all think. This isn't, I have to be on a phone call once a week with every community member. I don't do that. That's not possible. Chris and I have not connected super recently, but had this cool opportunity to talk today about leadership, and him and I were chatting. And it's that, it's that, there's a consistent communication. Maybe that's email, maybe that's text. Texting is a cool thing I'm starting to see more of in the nonprofit world, but it's that just showing belonging has points of care, right? Where you recognize that this community member is a part of something bigger that you're building, not for them, but together with them.
Mm-hmm. And so what are examples like in the last week or the last month that you've done that sort of added that special touch to the Nonprofit Hive that you think, whether it's via text or email, sort of like gives people that sense of belonging?
Yeah. So we just put out in the last week a great newsletter that we run bi-weekly. That seems to be enough. I have enough content. I probably could run a newsletter every couple of days, but bi-weekly, we're really consistent to put out a newsletter that, yes, highlights some of what we're doing, but also spotlights some of the amazing work that our community is doing out in the world, and really go, hey, when you started to launch and talk about the Proimpact Hive, it was like, this is a great opportunity. Everyone should know what he's doing out in the world. And I really think, community builders and the people who are building community have to be obnoxious cheerleaders for the people in the community too, right? And be willing to highlight their work. We put out every Tuesday, I do an interview with one of our members of our community and highlight what their work is, not what what the work is that necessarily we're doing, but how do they have a place within what we're building at the Nonprofit Hive.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so as familiar as people are with the Nonprofit Hive, they might not be familiar with community hives yet. And I wasn't. I mean, I remember, I'd been part of the Nonprofit Hive for a while, and you and I had even talked about community and sort of like what I was trying to do. And then when I came across one of your posts, I was like, wait a second, this is available for everybody, like this, the back-end tool that you built. So if folks aren't familiar, can you give them the sort of the overview of what Community Hives is?
Sure. And I got to shout out my own community members, because they were the ones who were like, what are you doing? How are you doing this in the background? And so the tech we built for ourselves last fall and into the winter, we spent the time in the background figuring out how could we break off this exact same model that we've used and be able to replicate it for others. So it's really a plug and play platform that allows one-to-one matching within your community. We handle all of the emails, invites, and reminders, all of the introductions between your community members, and provide the actual platform for them to jump on one-to-one calls with. And I just really believe that the future of a lot of community spaces is peer connection and peer learning and finding places for trust. And this is, for me at least, a potential solution to some really big forum fatigue we're all feeling, where most of these conversations are happening only by typing. And we know deeper connections happen when we actually get to talk to somebody.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned it, so for Proimpact Project, we wanted to create a hive just for executive directors, and sort of a version of the Nonprofit Hive, but EDs being able to get connected to other executive directors. And basically the EDs, it's the only really real other folks that you're able to talk about issues with the board and issues with your staff. And so sort of creating a sub community for that. But one of the things that I was just thinking of when you were describing what Community Hives does sort of relates to the thing you were talking about it's the little special things that make a difference, is it's kind of like Community Hives as a platform really does take care of all of the blocking and tackling of actually having the community run, so that as the person organizing it, you have the space to think about the little things that add where you can design for belonging that are one-off. And it's almost like taking all of the rote stuff off of your plate is what makes that possible. And they really do. They've designed for every part of it to be really, really smooth and easy. So our ED Hive, the very first email goes out tomorrow. We've got the first matches taking place in August. We're really excited. What are some other, what's another Hive that you could talk through how, another client is using it and what they're building?
I love that. I'm super excited for you guys. And I totally agree, because I think there are certain places in nonprofit and many of them where psychological safety is really low. You need someone that you can talk to who understands your journey, even though they don't know the entire backstory of your nonprofit, the history. You actually need less than you think. You just need those like points of connections where it's like, oh, we have a similar role, or we have a similar, sometimes it's by nonprofit type that I match, but an executive director, even whether you're just two small shop executive directors or one at a larger one, or you've both held that role at some point, you always have something to talk about. Hopefully some positive things too, right? Like not just the hard stuff to share. One of our other groups that has launched, and they launched a little while ago, I think they're on to chat like 4, they're doing monthly conversations. It's called the Global Africa Community Hive Initiative. And
Global Africa Community Hive Initiative.
Community Hive Initiative, yeah. And they are focused in on conversations and connections within the US and the African diaspora movement in the US, and African founders, researchers, universities, social aid organizations still in Africa. So they have a whole list of intake questions, very different than you'd see if you came to join the Nonprofit Hive. And instead, they're very much focused in on making those potential connections for collaboration. And they're still talking about nonprofit work, but they have very different goals than what my goals are for the Nonprofit Hive, and likely same for the Proimpact Hive's goals. It's going to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think for EDs out there, there's just so many potential use cases and applications for it. So for 9 years, I was the executive director of Coach Art, where we served kids affected by chronic illness. And so been doing that, you had kids who we were serving, and then their parents, our programs were for the kids, but the parents would always say, like, we would love to meet the other parents. Like, how can we get connected? And so that's its own little community that we were always trying to foster, and wasn't directly the group that we were serving, but we would say, like, what's something we can do to connect these parents with each other? Like, that's a potential use case. Donors, obviously, I'm curious the first time somebody uses it to launch a sort of like donor hive, what that might look like, and the interest that donors might have in connecting with each other. So it just seems like there are so many interesting ways that folks could use community hives to really deliver on this concept of community that we've talked about for so long, but that delivers on it in a much more real way. So it's exciting to think about.
Thanks. Yeah, community is a long tail, and it's an investment, right? It's an investment, and there's a huge amount of strategy that comes into community building that you can't just say the word community and it like magically is so, right? Even though I would love if that was the case, even myself, right? I guess it comes back to that care piece at the beginning again, where communities have rhythm. You kind of start to find your like rhythm within your community, and it builds over time. It doesn't just, I say it's so, and now all of a sudden I have this super engaged community. It keeps evolving with you. And if community done right feels very different. said about belonging at the beginning of this conversation. Community done right, there's a feeling there. And the majority of people who are very active in a community can usually describe what feels different in that community versus a community that they just signed up for and then churned in a month, right? They feel different.
Yeah. One specific thing that was fascinating going through the process with you and your team was the registration form and the ways that the algorithm can make the connections happen. One of the questions, and you mentioned it just a minute ago, was sort of around the idea of whether EDs wanted to connect with other EDs from similar missions, other EDs from similar sizes. And so we surveyed the EDs that we were building this for, and it was interesting. Some of them very much wanted to meet other EDs from similar missions. Some of them very much did not.
Yeah.
And said, I want to be able to have these really frank conversations with folks that I won't cross paths with, at similar events or, things that are mission related. And so the way that you all have the functionality, we just built that right into the onboarding question and said, would you prefer, to the degree that we can, would you prefer to meet with other EDs who are from similar missions, prefer to meet with other EDs who are not from similar missions, or no preference? And sort of that idea that people might be showing up to a community wanting really different things, and the flexibility of being able to deliver all of it. So yeah, it's just really cool.
I did not have that as one of our intake questions. Maybe I should have. Now we're almost 2 years in, working off the exact same intake form we had from the beginning, which has been interesting. But I really would look at our membership at least, and there's almost like a little bit of a rotation where it's every 3 weeks I try really to go, hey, this is similar. You've got a similarity here with your role or years in leadership, or you said you want to be a mentor. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, flip the script. Here's someone you would never, ever in a million years meet. This person does data management and you're a relational fundraiser. But hilariously, sometimes those connections end up being the most meaningful in ways I would have never anticipated. And some of those impact stories that are coming out of Hive chats that were 30 minutes, I organized it over a year ago for people, that now it's apparent, oh my goodness, these two humans just hit it off. And I had no idea. I didn't know that that was what I was building. I was just putting two people that I thought, well, I bet they're going to vibe on something, right? Like this is probably going to be cool for the two of them. And I think there is a lot that people will say, oh, well, certain people are weavers of networks and this comes naturally to them. I actually think we often know how to build relationships. And, that was kind of my post helping to like promote this a little bit. Nonprofit knows how to do this. We've all just been looking for a way to do it faster, quicker, and with more automation. And I actually think there needs to be a way to do this a little bit more sustainably. So that's what I was building for myself. And I think that there's something cool there for others to build community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you were mentioned a key metric, and sort of that wouldn't necessarily be one that immediately came to mind for how to measure whether a community is thriving. Can you talk about what that metric was and why you think that's an important one?
Yeah. So we talk about engagement rates a little bit in community and even in marketing, to be fair. My background was marketing, is still marketing. I still love marketing. And engagement rate can be really tough to measure. I've actually found it's a little bit easier for me to measure because of how we built the tool. We can see who our most engaged members are, who's taking the most conversations, who's consistently signing up, showing up. But I think that's actually a little bit easier to have some sort of measurement for community building that goes beyond just donor dollars. And, what's that interesting intersection between how often are people volunteering versus how much are they giving versus sometimes your biggest advocates who are out there talking about you on social media have never donated, but believe strongly in your mission. And so it's that weird intersection of all of those pieces is actually where really cool community building happens. And one of the smartest things I did early on with the Nonprofit Hive was starting to identify those ambassadors, those people who are out there talking about us and representing us in the most beautiful ways. I'm so glad that I decided to go, hey, these guys have great voices. Let's elevate them even more, right? But I never would have found those people if I hadn't been looking at a whole bunch of engagement metrics that were well beyond just who was donating or who was opening emails, or even who was just showing up on chats. I think there's a little bit of a variety of things to measure all at once.
And so what are some of the ways that you empowered those folks when you did find them?
Yeah, so we gave them fancy names and called them Hive ambassadors,
Nice.
which is great. They are listed on our website. This is not well, it doesn't have to be a permanent position. We already had one member who was just like this, listen, I know we talked about what this means because we did set out expectations of what it was when we started this. This is what we can offer. This is what, you'll be helping us with. That was too much for it's a busy nonprofit professional, not asking them for, commitment for years here. This isn't a role that they're getting paid for. But we also are working to go, hey, here's what the Hive looks like moving forward. This is what we're thinking of building for community. What are your thoughts? How would we, I constantly say to our ambassadors and our advisory board as well, poke holes in this. We have this idea. Our internal team kind of thinks it's good. What are the problems with it? And I can tell you, they are great, honest champions to poke holes in all of the wild ideas that we come up with here and tell me where it might collapse. What are things that I can't consider or think of because it's just too many moving pieces.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I'm curious what you think from a marketing standpoint, if you set out to do it this way, or just sort of came naturally. But it reminds me of the community flywheel concept, as opposed to sort of like growth through advertising, where you get somebody who's in your community, get them more engaged, and then turn them into an ambassador, where they're then the ones who are bringing in new members who are starting at the beginning of that flywheel, kind of finding out about the community, getting more drawn in, getting more engaged, and then they become an ambassador. And so sort of this free marketing, very trust-based, very authentic, like all the things that we talk about in nonprofit, wanting more of, that community flywheel approach really delivers on a lot of that. And it sounds like that's what you're seeing with those ambassadors.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're by far, they bring me into rooms without me ever having to show up in the room, right? What better gift can someone give you than to be talking about you when you're not there? That is incredible, right? That is such a gift and such a trust measure to have people that you trust to talk about you in those rooms too, right? So we can be our own best advocates and walk out there, but the reality is, especially when we're building something, when we're a startup founder, when we're an executive director of a small nonprofit, we need other people out there talking about us too, because trust is built by all those people around us. So a community flywheel, I love HubSpot's flywheel for marketing, is like my favorite way to think about it too, is that we don't really get to decide. Funnels are ridiculous in many ways because no one goes like that's not how life works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your biggest advocate, some people who are maybe my biggest advocate today, I could turn around in a year and it's like, well, no, they had to go off into this part of their life and they couldn't. That doesn't mean that they've dropped off the funnel. That's not how this works, right? So I think the community flywheel is much more human and more realistic of how humans move in the world, to go, sometimes they're going to be close to this and then they're going to have to spin outwards and they're going to just be in the periphery, walking around the edges until it makes sense for them to come back in again to the fold, or maybe not ever. And maybe they just keep talking about us on the outside fringes, helping support us at a level that is sustainable for them.
That reminds me, before you go, I want to make sure to ask you about That reminds me of something you said about how you thought about how to price community hives and to bake in that idea that people might drift away and then come back. Can you tell EDs a little bit about how it's priced and how you thought about it if they are thinking about creating a hive and community of their own?
Sure. So we did decide on a very base price with a nonprofit discount that we're offering to people who are running nonprofits. To me, we really wanted to make sure that we priced based on engagement. So when we built out the tech, it was with the idea and thought that what are the things that cost us as the provider? Well, it's the video, it's the email. Those are the big things that cost us money to provide back to our users. If they want to have 4,000 members all signed up, but only 10% engage, well, then we should be charging based on how many people engage. So we set up a 1,500 calls per year at the very base price. And if you want more than that, proportionally, we're going to look at like, hey, it's September 1st. You're going to run out of calls at this rate on September 15th. We imagine you're going to need this many more chats. So if your community is running well and it's like bumping along and you've got great traction, amazing. Well, then that's probably a really good sign to invest more in this idea, and it's going to cost you more. If you stay small, it never gets bigger, you only have this many chats, well, then you never have to get any bigger. And I think it's one of my biggest beefs with email platforms for nonprofits in this sector is everybody hates when MailChimp bumps over 500 users. And so now you have to clean that list because you think, well, I got to stay under 500 because it's costing me a fortune. Like that's unfortunate. And I really disagree for that to be the methodology, is that the more people who are interested, the more you're going to get punished because you're growing. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, Tasha, I just love how thoughtful you are about every single bit of how you go about the Nonprofit Hive and how you've built community hives. And it's very much appreciated. And so thank you for joining today. It was fun to get to chat with you about it.
So great. Thanks, Greg.
And I hope that we have at the brand new Proimpact ED Hive starting tomorrow, eventually have the types of good problem to have that Tasha was talking about. Where we do have so many people engaging with it that we need to grow it bigger and bigger. So today's the last day. If you want to get involved in the very first chats, to sign up at proimpact.org/hive. I think Chris, our producer, has put the link in the chat. And so we hope that folks join and check it out, and check out community hives, for all the EDs out there thinking about creating your own community and your own hive. It really is an incredible platform and an incredible deal. And so would invite folks to check that out. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us. We've got a bunch more exciting episodes to come, and we've been scheduling some more over the next few weeks. And we've got a little video about what next week's episode will include. So thank you so much.
Did you miss an episode of the Proimpact Pod? Or just want to go back and listen again? Great news! You can now find all our past episodes on YouTube. Click the link in the description now and subscribe for new Proimpact Project content. New episode replays will be posted Wednesdays. Coming up on episode 105 of the Proimpact Pod, how should modern executive directors think about donor-advised funds? Join host Greg Harrell Edge and special guest Mitch Stein live on LinkedIn on Tuesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern, or catch the replay on YouTube.